Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning everywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis, for this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus, Managing Software with Yum, the title of this episode. And once again, we've asked our expert, Don Pizzette, to share his insights. Don, good to see you.
Hey, glad to be here in what is unfortunately not a food episode. We are going to be talking about Yum.
Food's good.
It gets the mind thinking. But we're going to be taking a look at Yum, which is the package manager included with pretty much every Red Hat distribution that's out there. So Red Hat Enterprise Linux, CentOS, Fedora, anybody that is a derivative from Red Hat. It allows us to install software, update software, uninstall software. And those are all basically the laundry list of the things that we're going to be taking a look at here in this episode as we learn about how to leverage Yum to manage software on our systems.
So, Don, what is the difference between Yum and DNF?
All right, so you're going to hear a lot out there on the internet, in the wilds. You'll hear about DNF, another package manager that's available in the Red Hat world. Yum is the primary one. It's the one that's on the exam, and in real life, it's the one that you're going to be using right now. Yum actually stands for the Yellow Dog Update Manager. There used to be a distribution of Linux called Yellow Dog Linux, and it was made to allow you to run Linux on Macs. And they created this update manager that would do package management, track dependencies, and all that. It was really cool. And so Red Hat adopted that, and that's where Yum came from. Well, one thing about Yum is it wasn't perfect when it came to tracking dependencies. It tries to say, like, all right, if you're going to install software A might require software B, C, and D. So we'll install them all at the same time. And it tries to keep track of that. And it does a pretty good job. But the more software you install, the more complex that map gets and the harder time Yum has with it. So they've been working on a replacement for Yum, a newer version called DNF. And DNF, oddly enough, it stands for Dandified Yum. And I don't know how they come up with these names exactly, but it's been dandified.
I'm holding back a laugh.
Yeah, it's a weird
great
one. Makes me think of like flowers and rainbows.
Yeah.
But anyhow, that's what DNF stands for. And if you're running Fedora, DNF is your default package manager. Yum is still there. At the time of this recording, Yum is still there on Fedora, although they've talked about replacing it. So that is coming down the line. But in RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and CentOS, it's still Yum. That's the package manager that you use, and DNF isn't even included yet. It will be eventually. Now, fortunately, we don't have to worry about it too much because all of the command line options and the command line arguments that we use with Yum are the same under DNF. So if you're watching this show and you run Fedora, anytime I say Yum, just swap that out for DNF. Or if you hear me say DNF and you're running CentOS, just swap out DNF for Yum. The commands are all the same, so that makes life a little bit easier. But DNF is the newer version. It is the way of the future. We'll all be running DNF before too terribly long. But right now, Yum is still considered the stable standard package manager for Red Hat.
Where does the software we're installing actually come from, Don?
So if you're running RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it comes from Red Hat, right? It comes from their repositories that they have set up, which is a collection of curated packages that are all stored on servers up there in Red Hat land, and you can download them using Yum. If you're running CentOS, it comes from either their repository or there's some third-party repositories that you're able to tap into to download software from as well. So the software can really come from anywhere. You can actually just download a straight-up package and install it. Let me give you an example. There's a package I talked about in the Ubuntu show where we were dealing with, it's a web-based management utility for Linux servers called Webmin. And Webmin is not in the repos. I can't get it from Red Hat. But that's okay. I can just go to the Webmin website, and right on their website, they have where I can download an RPM. Now, RPM stands for the Red Hat Package Manager. And in the early days of Red Hat, that was all you had. When you installed a package, you would download an RPM file, and you would use the RPM utility to install it. And we still have that utility. If I do a man RPM, it's still there. The thing about RPM is it didn't track dependencies. So when you downloaded an RPM file, if you didn't already have all the dependencies installed, you'd get errors. So you'd have to install everything that package depended on. Yum solves that problem. So that's the ideal way to do it. And it gets those dependencies from the repositories, these servers that maintain all of the packages. And if you want to see what servers are being connected to, you can browse to /etc/yum.repos.d. That folder right there. In fact, remember earlier I said you could change out Yum for DNF wherever you wanted? Yum looks for its repos right here in this folder. DNF looks for its repos right here in this folder as well. It still keeps the yum.repos.d folder name, right? Eventually that will change to dnf.repos.d, but that's not, or actually it'll be /etc/dnf/dnf.conf is where it'll end up. But that change hasn't happened yet. So it's yum.repos.d for everybody. And when you look inside of that folder, you're going to see a number of files. Each file is a repo file that points to a repository. I'm running CentOS, and every one of these repositories that's listed is one of theirs. That's where the software is coming from. If you look at like CentOS Base or CentOS Media, the Vault, each one of these are different collections of software, and you can turn them on and off. If you don't need source code, you can turn off the sources repository. In fact, I think most of these are turned off. CentOS Base being the most important one. Let's take a look at it. And when we look in here, what you'll see is how that is defined. It's got a name for what the repository is, and then it's got a mirror list. A mirror list is a file that contains a list of alternate servers we can download from. If a lot of people are downloading, it can be pretty slow. So there'll be 10, 20, 100 servers sometimes that you can reach out to. So you have to get the list to figure out where to go. And then we can see an entry here that's telling us this one is using digital signatures. Files can be tampered with, right? If an attacker were to break into a repository, they could stick all sorts of malware in there and you would just download it blindly. That would be bad. So this one's using digital signatures so we can verify that those packages haven't been tampered with and make sure that everything's okay. So it's using GPG or GNU Privacy Guard to be able to ensure that, which is pretty well trusted throughout the security community. So that's where the distros are coming from. The repos are coming from, and we pull our software. So when I do something like a yum install command and I specify a package name, it's just reaching out to those servers and pulling down that data.
Well, can we see the list of software available in the repo?
You can. There's actually a metadata file in the repo. You can browse to the URL and navigate that way, but I'll tell you, it is such a massive list. There's thousands of packages that are in there that you really don't want to do that. Instead, what you want to do is search for things. If you know what you're looking for, a big raw list of thousands upon thousands of items is not going to help anybody.
No.
But if you can search, you can find what you're looking for. I want to install a web server on this system. So I want to install Apache. So I can go and I can look and try and find Apache. Now, when I do that search, I can do it two different ways. I can say yum list Apache. What that's going to do is it's going to list any package that has Apache in the name. And so when I run that, it's going to go and I don't get anything, right? Well, it's not Apache in the name. It's that the package name would be exactly Apache, all right? So in this case, it wasn't called Apache. Maybe it's Apache followed by something else, right? In Debian, it's called Apache 2. So if I search for Apache star, now it would be any package that starts with Apache and ends with who knows what else. Or maybe I just want to do stars on both sides, so it can just have the word Apache somewhere in the name. And when I run that, all right, now I start getting some stuff back. So where's my Apache web server? I got a bunch of Apache Commons stuff. I don't see the web server. All right. This is a challenge we run into where oftentimes the package names don't match up with the software like you expect. All right. In fact, I know that with CentOS, it's not called Apache. It's called HTTPD, right? Or the Hypertext Transport Protocol daemon. And if you know that, you go and you search for HTTPD and you find it. No big deal, right? But if this is your first time using CentOS, how are you supposed to know it uses an alternate name? You don't. So instead of doing a list like this, where it's searching based on file name, you can do a yum search. This searches through the metadata of the packages and it looks for keywords. And if I had done a yum search for Apache, it would have found quite a bit right on the first try without me doing anything too crazy. See down here at the bottom, it's saying name and summary matches. It's looking at the package name as well as the description. And as I look around in here, I can look at the description and figure out which one of these is actually referring to the web server itself. And you can see this entry right here. Here's the Apache HTTP server, and the package name is actually called HTTPD right there. So using yum search is a lot more powerful. It can return a lot more information, but it's a more powerful utility to find what we want. And once we find it, from there, we're able to go and get it installed. But that's a heck of a lot easier than just going and trying to pull some giant list. Now, if you're not positive, maybe I'm still not positive this is the right package, I can go a step further and say yum info HTTPD, and that's going to provide additional information about that package, including the URL. I always find this really handy. Like, does it point back to the right website? Okay, if it points to some wrong website, then I know that's not it. And then I get a better description here. The Apache HTTP server is a powerful, efficient, and extensible web server, so I know I've found the right one. That's the one that I want to get installed.
So once we found our software, how do we install it?
At that point, we just use yum install.
Ah.
Pretty straightforward.
Sounds good.
All we'll do is you do need to use sudo, right? Because you got to be a super user to install software. So I'm going to say sudo yum install HTTPD. Now, when I found the package earlier, it also included the architecture in the file name. I'm on a 64-bit system, so it's x86_64. You actually don't need to put the architecture on there. It'll look at your system and figure out the right one. So I'm going to just run it like that, and it's going to find that service and install it. Oh, actually, it's not, because it looks like I've already got it. Already had it installed, right? That's another thing that Yum does. It keeps track of what you've already installed, so you're not wasting time. So apparently, I already had that one installed, and it's there. If I wanted to install something else, I don't know. I can actually do more than one package at the same time. So I could say like yum install, Midnight Commander, Vim, Python, I don't know, whatever else it is I can think of. And whoops, I forgot to sudo it after reminding everybody else to not forget to do that. And so it's going to look at, oh man, I've got all those installed too. Having a hard time thinking of stuff that that I don't already have installed. Apparently, I installed too much stuff. All right. Well, anyhow, that command right there, that'll install things if you don't have them. Yeah. Well, there we go.
Well, what if the software we want isn't in the repo?
All right. So if you've used the list command and it didn't show up, well, that happens a lot. You use the search command and it doesn't show up, then the odds are it's not there. It's not in the repo. And there's plenty of software out there that's not in the repository. And you can always go out to that third-party vendor and find a way to install it, right? I gave the example earlier of webmin. If I do a sudo yum search webmin, right, and just look through the whole set, it doesn't find it anywhere. Not in a package name, not in a package description or summary. Webmin is not in the official repositories, okay? So if that's the case, I need to make a choice. There's two different ways I can install software that's not in a repo. Option one is I can just go and download the package directly from the vendor. If I go back to Webmin's webpage, right on their homepage, they have download Webmin version 1.9, and here's the RPM file, and I can download it. If I download it, it's going to look like this right here. Webmin-1.900-1.noarch.rpm. No arch means this is not tied to a particular architecture. It's a web page, so it doesn't care if you're running ARM or x86 or 64-bit, whatever. It doesn't care. So it's got no architecture. But that's it. It's an RPM file. And I can now install it. I could use RPM, the old RPM command line, and install it that way. But Webmin has some dependencies. If you go back to the instructions, they're telling me, oh yeah, you can install it, but you also need to install Perl, Perl-net, SSL, EAY, OpenSSL, all these other things, right, that need to go along with it. But if you're using Yum, it'll usually find those dependencies and install them for us so that we don't have to do it. So that's kind of a better option for us than using RPM. And DNF would do the same thing. I can say yum install or DNF install and point it to that file. If I do that, I'll say sudo yum install, and then I'm going to point to the file right here in my home folder. It's going to look at it and see how it found some of those dependencies. There's Perl-net, SSL, EAY, however you say that. So it found that one, and I didn't actually have to install it ahead of time like the Webmin guys were telling me. Several of the other dependencies I must have already had because they didn't really show up in here. So it looks like we're good there. It's just these two. I could say yes right now, and it will install Webmin for me, and I'll have it, right? So that works, not too hard. The negative here, though, is over time, I'm going to want to update my system and apply any latest updates. Maybe Webmin version 1.91 comes out, or they finally make it to 2.0. I don't know. Some update comes out. Well, I'm not going to get that update unless I go and manually download the new RPM file and then install that with Yum as well. So it's really easy to fall behind your updates when you install manually like this. And that's a risk, especially on a server, because maybe a high priority security fix comes out and you don't know about it. You don't even know the update is available. Better yet, have a chance to get it installed. So that's one option, but it's kind of a negative, right? The other option is maybe that vendor provides their own repository. A lot of them do. They might not be in the official repository, but they create their own repo. And you can tie into that to install their software. And Webmin does exactly that. If I scroll down a little bit further here, you'll see where they have a Yum repository, which works with DNF as well. So again, still all kind of interchangeable. And what they're giving me here is all the information I need to add their repository to my system to be able to leverage that and reach out to it. So the way we add a repository, remember I was in /etc/yum.repos.d, and every repository here had its own file, okay? Well, I can create a new one. So I'm gonna do a sudo vim slash, well, I can just do // and I'll call this one webmin.repo, all right? The file extension actually doesn't matter. You can call it whatever you want, but they do .repo by default just so it's consistent. And what I'm going to do is paste in that information they gave me like that, all right? And let's take a look at what all that says. I pasted kind of weird, isn't it? Well, we can clean it up. Not too big of a deal. But basically, what you're seeing in here are the minimum requirements for having a repo installed. And I'm going to just see if I can zoom in a little bit on this. There we go. All right. So first, we got square brackets, Webmin. That's going to be the short notation name for this. When I'm referencing it from the command line, I can use that. But then we get the full name here, Webmin Distribution Neutral. That just means any distro that uses Yum can tap into this. And DNF is compatible, SUSE Linux is compatible, so they can all reach in and share the same thing. Then the base URL of where the repo is going to be found. Now, we don't normally use the base URL. That's because we have a mirror list right afterwards. And you'll see download.webmin.com/download/yum/mirror list. That's a file that contains a list of a bunch of servers that all have this Webmin software. So if one's down, I can get it from another, and one isn't getting overloaded. We kind of spread the workload across those servers. So that's where it's actually going to come from, right? Now, one of the challenges that we'll have is if we're pulling from these mirrors, I might trust the team at Webmin, but do I trust the mirrors? Do I even know who the mirrors are, right? It doesn't show it here, right? So there's a bit of a trust problem. Well, with Webmin, they digitally sign their update packages. That way you can tell it hasn't been tampered with. And in order for that digital signature to work, we've got to install a copy of their public key on our system. That doesn't show up here. In the Ubuntu show where we were doing apt, you actually saw it here in the repo. But in here, this case, we don't. So I'm just going to save this. Let me zoom back out. I'm going to save this file like it is. And let me get back into my home directory. And what you'll see on their website, they had instructions for this, but we can download a copy of their public key, and we can install it into our GPG keychain. GPG is the GNU Privacy Guard, and it allows us to do hashed signatures so that we can validate whether things have been tampered with or not. So I'm going to install this one. I need to get a copy of their key, so I'm going to use wget. And I will point to their server, which is www.webmin.com/jcameron, that's the author, -key.asc. ASC just means it's an ASCII file, right? So it's text. And if I want to look at it, I can pull that right up. And there we go. There's his GNU Privacy Guard public key. It's published on his website. And anybody can use this key and compare a file that they just got from a third-party repository or a mirror and compare it with this key to validate whether or not it's been tampered with or not. So anyhow, that's all a part of what that signature does. I downloaded the key, but I haven't installed it yet, so I need to do that next. And I do need to use the older RPM utility to do this, and I'll have to sudo it. So I'm going to do RPM-I to import, or you can do -- import. And then we'll import that jcameron-key.asc. That's going to import it. So now when it does package validation, that's one more key that it's going to trust when it reaches out. And at that point, now I've got a repo that contains Webmin. I should be able to install it. I should be able to do a sudo yum list Webmin. And it found it. There it is, Webmin no arch. I should be able to do a sudo yum search. Actually, I don't need a sudo list and search, but anyhow, there it is. It finds it. A web-based administration interface for Unix systems. And then I can actually install it by using sudo yum install. It finds it, reads it from the repository, locates the dependencies, and now it's going to install. The end result is the same as if I had installed it using the actual downloaded RPM file earlier. The advantage, though, is because I'm tied to the repository, whenever I do my normal updates, it's going to find webmin updates as well. And it's going to keep it up to date alongside the rest of my system. So it's always preferable to install from a repository whenever possible. If they've got a repo, use it. If they don't, yeah, you can go ahead and use the RPM files. But then you need to like set your calendar and say, how often do I need to check for updates for that software, since I know it's not going to be updating on its own?
Does Yum automatically update software when new versions are released?
It doesn't. So it allows me to track the updates, but it's not automatic, right? So we have to get in and do that. And there actually are ways to make it automatic. You can do cron jobs, and there's actually if you look in the repos, there's a cron yum that you can run where it just automatically runs. But Red Hat doesn't recommend that because updates can sometimes break your software, right? You're supposed to look at the updates and test them and make sure everything works properly before you roll it out in production. I know not everybody does that, but that's what you're supposed to do, right? So that's why it's not automatic. But we can always tell it to check whenever we want. And you do that just by running sudo yum update. And when you run that, it's going to take a look at all of the repositories. And it's going to compare the list of software you have installed with the software that's available in the repository. And it's going to look for differences, right? Where is there a newer version? And when I ran this, it was looking not just at the Red Hat repositories, but also looking at the webmin repository. It just checked for updates for that as well. And I just had one, my policy kit has an update apparently. So if I want to apply that, I can say yes, and we'll get it in there. Now, with the Ubuntu episode, we had to do a few different commands, right? There was an apt update command to update the cache, and then an apt upgrade command to install the software, and then an apt dist-upgrade to upgrade the actual distribution. 3 different commands. With Yum, it's not like that. They're all in one, all right? So when I run sudo yum update, it's updating its cache, it's updating my packages, and it's updating my core operating system all in one command. So we don't have all that separation. There are actually command line operators you can use to kind of emulate that type of scenario, but generally with Red Hat distros, they want you to update everything together. A lot of software can be tied to a kernel version, so it's kind of nice to be able to upgrade those at the same time. But when I run sudo yum update, it's going to apply. If I know I trust all the updates, I could have added a -y, and then it wouldn't have even prompted me. It would have just said, if I find an update, I'm going to apply it, and that's that, right? But at that point, I know it's updated. All my core install stuff and webmin are all up to date.
So how can we remove software if we no longer need it done?
All right, a few different options here. If we don't need software anymore, so maybe I don't need webmin anymore, well, I can remove that by using Yum. Now, when I did this in the Debian or in the Ubuntu show, I got an error with my uninstall script. So let's see if we get that here. What I'm going to do is sudo yum, and then there's a few different things that you can do here. Usually you want to do sudo remove, and then the name of the software. I'm going to remove webmin, okay? So it's going to look for that package, and it's going to offer to remove it. I'll just say yes, and there it goes. It's going to uninstall it, okay? So that was sudo yum remove followed by the package name. Yep, no errors this time. So apparently the webmin team has an error with their uninstall on Ubuntu for some reason. But on CentOS and Red Hat, working fine. So anyhow, yum remove. That gets it out of there. You can go a step further. When you installed webmin, or any package for that matter, it usually gets cached. And especially if there have been upgrades over time, then there might be more than one version of that RPM laying around, and they just sit there on the hard drive. We usually don't care about it, right? But over time, that stuff can build up. Maybe you start to run out of hard drive space. You can actually do a yum erase webmin or whatever the package is called. And if you do an erase, what it does is it looks for all of the other files that might be attached to it and the RPMs and things that might get left behind, and it flushes it out of the cache. It's a much more aggressive way to remove things. It's generally not necessary, and typically you don't want to do it. You usually want to use remove so that you've got a record of like why certain dependencies are there and so on. When you erase, this is like saying, slash and burn. You do not want this software on here, and everything needs to be gone. So that's what that one gets used for. But usually we're going to use remove. With DNF, it would be the same thing. We would say sudo DNF, remove webmin, and so on. DNF actually does have one more command, though, which is DNF auto remove. And if you run that, it looks for any dependencies that are no longer being used and automatically removes them. Yum does it on a per uninstall basis, but with DNF, you can check anytime for unused dependencies and it'll wipe those out. So it's kind of a neat one. That functionality, at least to my knowledge, is not present in Yum. So that's one of the newer features. But otherwise, we've now removed webmin from our system. I could remove any other software that I wanted, and I'm ready to go on about my life without that software being present.
Yeah, that was an awesome episode as usual, Don. Thank you so much. Managing software with Yum. And that's not in yummy, that's Yum. As in applications and software. Okay, Don, anything else you'd like to say before we move on?
Uninstalls are not perfect. And one area that I find a lot of people miss out on is when you uninstall software like that, if you open up holes in your firewall for that software, they're still there. The firewall configuration is not a part of the software. So webmin, for example, runs on port 10,000. If I had opened that in my firewall, it would still be open right now. So after I uninstall that software and decommission it, I need to go and close those firewall holes. That needs to be a part of your documentation. Whenever you install any softwares, any additional ancillary configurations go along with it, need to be kept track of so that it can be undone when you remove that software.
Great advice. And you know something? Here's some more good advice for you. Make sure you watch every single episode of CompTIA Linux Plus. It's going to be good for you now and in the future. And when that exam inevitably comes along, oh boy. And don't forget extra study. We take a look at the supplementary information in our course library, for instance. It will do only one thing, help you be even more successful. So check that out too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.